The first time John Kennedy walked outside and found a stranger's SUV blocking his driveway, he thought it was a mistake. After all, who would deliberately park in front of a home that clearly wasn't theirs? But when he leaned closer and saw the bright HOA parking permit dangling from the rearview mirror, his stomach sank. He already knew whose car it was. It belonged to Hira, the neighbor everyone whispered about, the one they nicknamed Karen. She was the type who never knocked on her door but was quick to send an HOA complaint if your grass was a half-inch too high. She was also the type who believed the neighborhood rules somehow never applied to her. At first, John tried to be reasonable. He walked up the street, knocked on her door, and explained gently, "Ma'am, your car is blocking my driveway. I've got to leave for work soon." She stared at him with folded arms, a smirk playing across her face. "It's not blocking your entire driveway. You could squeeze out if you really tried. Besides, street parking is public property." John clenched his jaw. He wanted to remind her that a driveway was not public property, but he bit back his words. He had learned long ago that some people only hear what they want. Instead, he asked politely if she could move it. With exaggerated slowness, she grabbed her keys and strolled out, muttering something about people being too uptight. That was the first time. But it wasn't the last. Over the next 2 weeks, it became a pattern. Some mornings, her SUV would be angled across his driveway. Other days, it was fully blocking the entrance. Each time, Job had to knock, wait, and listen to her condescending excuses. She always had only her driveway was too narrow, her guests needed space. It was only temporary. John tried everything. He left notes on her windshield. He emailed the HOA board, explaining the problem. But the HOA was slow, wrapped up in bureaucracy and endless meetings. Meanwhile, he was late to work, missing appointments, and even once had to cancel his mother's doctor's visit because her car was stuck in the garage with Karen's SUV blocking the way. That was the breaking point. His mother, frail and recovering from surgery, had looked at him with worried eyes that day and whispered, "Johnny, don't let people walk all over you." So he didn't. The next morning, when he opened his garage door and saw her SUV sitting there again like a smug blockade, he didn't march to her house. He didn't knock. He didn't even leave a note. Instead, he pulled out his phone, dialed a tow company, and within 30 minutes, the SUV was gone. When Karen stormed down the street screaming an hour later, it was almost cinematic. She pounded on his door, shouting words like theft and harassment, her face turning a shade of red that matched her nail polish. John listened calmly, then handed her the tow company's card. "It's at the impound lot," he said coolly. "Next time, don't block my driveway." You'd think that would have been enough, that she would have learned. But Karen wasn't the type to learn, as she was the type to escalate. 2 days later, her SUV was back in the exact same spot, blocking his driveway once again like a deliberate challenge. She even positioned it more aggressively this time, as if daring him to act. John felt his blood pressure rise. For a moment, he almost second-guessed himself. What if towing it again made things worse? What if she filed some sort of false complaint against him? But then he remembered his mother's words, the appointments he had missed, the humiliation of being treated like his own home wasn't his sanctuary. So he called the tow truck. Again and again, the SUV vanished before Karen even realized it. The second time hit harder for her. She had to pay double the fees, plus an additional fine for repeat offenses. The tantrum that followed was even louder than the first, but this time, the neighborhood heard everything. Curtains lifted, doors cracked open. Neighbors who had once been silent suddenly stepped out. One elderly man across the street shouted, "Serves you right, Karen. You've been blocking my mailbox for months." Another neighbor chimed in. Finally, someone stood up to her. For the first time, John realized he hadn't just fought his own battle, he had fought a collective one. Karen, humiliated and cornered, filed a complaint with the HOA, claiming harassment. But by then, the neighborhood had had enough of her antics. When the board reviewed her complaint, they found half a dozen counter-complaints from other residents. The verdict was unanimous. She was fined heavily, warned formally, and reminded that repeated violations could lead to legal consequences. From that day forward, her SUV never touched John's driveway again. In fact, she began parking all the way down the street, Far from the eyes of her neighbors, the swagger in her step disappeared, replaced by the quiet shuffle of someone who had finally been forced to face accountability. John didn't celebrate outwardly. He wasn't the gloating type. But late one evening, as he watched his mother rest peacefully in the living room, he whispered to himself, "Sometimes standing up for yourself is standing up for everyone." And that was the real victory, not just a cleared driveway, but the reclaiming of dignity, respect, and the peace of knowing he had turned frustration into strength. In the end, Karen's arrogance was no match for persistence and courage. John Kennedy had proven that sometimes, the best way to deal with a bully isn't to argue a broken bar, it's to take action.